Welcome back to Roll for Origin, a podcast about the history of superhero role-playing games. I'm Jay, creator of Lifted Indomitable, a supers role-playing game about ordinary folks with extraordinary powers.
I'm Lowell, community manager for the Open Hearth Gaming Community and the co-writer and designer of Hearts of Lowell, which is sort of superhero adjacent, but I definitely have a real love for superhero RPGs.
Today, we're going to talk about Champions, 1st edition through 3rd edition. Champions is it's probably my bar for superhero games. Yeah. I've got a lot of love for this game, so be prepared for us to nerd out. First published in 1981, Champions created a new direction for super role-playing games and role-playing games in general. First, characters would be entirely point-based, allowing players to completely customize them. Second, powers would be built on effects, with less emphasis on themes and description for results. And third, this point system would create balance and allow for clear tactical play, either with a GM or player versus player, which we did a lot of.
A lot. Open combat is what we called it.
We called it Danger Room. Okay. Let's have a Danger Room session. In talking about this, we're lumping together the first three editions of Champions. We'll talk more about that and the game's publishing history in a moment. The biggest innovation among many is that Champions offers building blocks to create powers. You apply modifiers to a base effect, which says what the power does. To make them better, effects can be enhanced via advantages like area effect, armor piercing, or usable at range. This increases the cost of the power. To make them cheaper, players can apply limitations, like an activation roll, limited number of uses, or based on focus. Additionally, you could use power frameworks like multi-power and elemental control to bundle together related powers and reduce the cost. To supplement, Champions 3, which is not Champions 3rd edition, added a variable power pool framework, which would become a point of controversy going forward. And I would say a point of controversy and the source of many arguments and fights.
Yes, it's so weird how that is such a painful moment.
It is, and I think for me it clicked conceptually what was going on there. Champions also takes an interesting approach to combat resolution. Up until this point, most games had gone one of two ways. In some games, characters had an attack number, often based on a skill, which they had to roll against. A lot of different modifiers would usually impact this number. Other games, players consulted a chart comparing an attack value to a defense type, giving a number that they had to roll against to hit. Some systems, like basic role-playing, complicated this by allowing a defense test to avoid being hit, like a dodge or parry. Champions instead had a simple formula. Characters had an offensive combat value, or OCV, and a defensive combat value, DCV. DCV is subtracted from the OCV plus 11. The result is the number the player has to roll equal to or under on 3d6 to hit. Damage and armor are then calculated separately. I always love that formula. It's algebra. That's it. It's done.
It's so simple to calculate at the table. It's so different from anything we had played and still different from a lot of later games.
Another difference is that while other games had used only D6s, for example, Traveler and the Fantasy Trip, many opted to use all or most of the polyhedral dice. Champions leans into the D6 only approach, and it works to build interesting elements, for example, how players calculate normal and killing damage. Champions has a bunch of other mechanical innovations. Skills are split out from powers. Some of these allow you to do standard actions, while others allow you to access unique maneuvers. Players could take skill levels, giving them a bonus for particular actions. These skill levels cost more depending how broadly they work. The endurance system has a cost based on power level instead of the arbitrary cost assignment as we saw in Villains and Vigilantes, or uses per level as in Dungeons and Dragons. Endurance costs could be modified as well. It could be cheaper to use, but at the expense of making the power itself pricier. Finally, it's a minor thing, but the characters have outlines which could be used to easily draw in your costume, and that was my favorite part.
Absolutely. Those character figure silhouettes, people would fall in love with particular ones
Yes.
and would use them all the time. And it was such, I mean, this is pre-Photoshop. There's no resource for getting images, and it really, really did the work.
And there were several of them. I think you had like 3 body types for male and female.
Later, they would get flyers and different ones. Yeah.
Those were fantastic. A lot of times I would start with filling that in and then make the character. While I'm not sure if it is the first disadvantages system, Champions really set the template for this. Players can take a variety of disadvantages for their character. These gain you more points to spend on your character. The more these potentially impact you, the more points you get. Many of these disadds bring out story elements and can trigger adventures. We'll come back to talk about the good and the bad of disadvantages later on. While this is a scaled system, i.e. Green Arrow and Green Lantern aren't equivalent, the balance point buy system allows GMs to easily design encounters without resorting to levels or challenge ratings. Eventually, a rubric of dice per turn would arise, which GMs use to set limits. For example, a common limit would be 60 dice per turn. You calculated this by multiplying your speed, the number of times in a 12-tick turn you went, by your biggest attack. So in this case, a 4-speed character could do a 15d6 normal attack at most. A 5-speed could throw 12 dice of damage, and a 6-speed could do 10 dice.
So the history of Champions is really interesting to me because it does come out of the blue from fans. In 1981, This Is Hero Games. It didn't even call itself that for a while. It's not listed as that on the first book. We have designers George McDonald and Steve Peterson's first edition, which was a simple run of about 1,500 that they tried out at West Coast Origins, and it sold well, and then it went to distributors. And so that one was a simple all-in-one 56-page saddle-stapled book, normal 8.5 by 11 size. The following year, they released a revised boxed edition, which we're referring to as Champion Second Edition, and the things in RPG Geek and elsewhere also listed that way. That 80-page version in the box included a 16-page scenario, a street map, and had dice in it. And there would be a couple of different versions of what the cover looked like on that on different printings. But normally it's the same cover as the first one, but in gray. Probably to save a little bit of money there.
And that's the version I had was the gray version. Still have. So I will never let it go.
That release would be followed by several important supplements, like several enemies books, which were the monster manuals with these villainous characters, all statted out. Escape from Stronghold, which was the first super prison scenario, and the Island of Dr. Destroyer. They would all share a very similar look in terms of cover and interior art, most of it done by, I think almost all of it done by Mark Williams, who really defined that look for the first couple of editions.
Right.
Now, yeah, and I love those images.
Yeah.
And it gets stronger as years pass.
Right.
There would be a few notable third-party supplements. For example, the Golden Age of Champions from Firebird Limited was offering a pulpy World War II take on the genre. And then Auto Duel Champions from Steve Jackson's games offered a supplement for Car Wars and Champions showing how to combine the two. A very weird book.
There was.
What a meeting of the minds there. Chaosium also released Bad Medicine for Dr. Drugs and Trouble for Havoc, which were super modules that had stats for several systems, including their own Superworld system and Champions. But probably the most important first-party supplements came as they were transitioning from the second edition of Champions to the third, and that is Champions 2, the super supplement, and Champions 3, another super supplement. The former had new rules, skills and powers, base building, hazards, all these different control sheets, and a host of other assorted bits. There was these thing called a turtle armor control sheet. So it basically a team of armored goons. You had a cheat for controlling them. The later book, Champions 3, would do much of this, more of the same, but with more powers, power modifiers, ideas of combat, and discussion of campaigns. A lot of articles on different topics put together into those. By the time we get, though, to Champions 3, we're starting to get a different layout and different book design. So Mark Williams' work is started to be phased out in favor of a larger team of artists. And this happens about the time that Hero Games joins with Iron Crown Enterprises of Rollmaster fame.
Mm.
They come in as their publisher. Prior to this, Hero Games had tried to expand what came to eventually be called the Hero system with things like espionage, super agents, and Justice Inc., which had some mixed success. Joining with Iron Crown really gave the company more room to operate. In 1984, with Iron Crown, they put together Champions Third Edition. That went through and took much, but not all of the material that had been printed in Champions 2 and Champions 3. It changed the layout and focused on a single book version of the rules. It kind of sets a template for what goes on even up into Champions 4th Edition. Now, Champions 3, nice book, has lots of stuff in it, but there's some real debate about the rules bloat that's happening.
Yeah.
A lot of powers, a lot of extra rules, a lot of options. It's interesting because this is also the last hurrah for the original creators working on Champions. By the time we get to 1984, and certainly after, nearly all the people who started the company had moved on to other fields, and notably a number of them moving on to computer games. During the time of that Champions Third Edition, 84 and a little bit past, and the Iron Crowns Enterprises Association, Hero Games tried several more variations, including Fantasy Hero.
Right.
And that did fairly well.
It did.
Got a lot of supplements. But things like Robot Gladiators, Robot Warriors, Star Hero just did not go anywhere. They were definitely trying to establish a universal set of rules to parallel GURPS. And eventually in 1989, with the fourth edition, you get a separate Hero System rules book. So that's part of the material that Hero Iron Crown and Hero Games generate during this time. And a lot of material, but some of it is alienating some of the fans. In particular, Iron Crown was trying to cross the streams, and Rollmaster supplements, especially for their Shadow World setting, started to feature conversions and stats for Hero System rules.
Mm-hmm.
And that meant you had the two games with the most detail for characters and numbers and things like that, both of them in these books, eating up a lot of space. And so you got more page count that just was not for the game that you had bought the game for. There would be some attempts a little bit later on to push back against this. They would take the different systems, but they take the same setting. So Western Hero for Hero system and Outlaw for the Rollmaster sort of system use exactly the same world setting and explanation and world details and things like that, but with a different system. They did the same thing with Cyberspace and Cyber Hero.
Right.
And it's actually more distinctive because it's a very definitive, specific setting for that. Eventually, the two companies would split, but that's a ways down the road after the release of Champions 4th Edition. A lot of great supplements released during this period.
Yeah.
Things I haven't mentioned, Aaron Alston's Strike Force, Red Doom.
Yeah.
I may have mentioned Super Agents. These are all really cool source books. And when we get to the discussion, we are also going to talk about the Champions module, which got recalled and pulped, Wings of the Valkyrie.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So Champions did become the dominant superhero game. It really kind of pushed villains and vigilantes off to the side. Probably the other big rival that it had, the real competitor, was Marvel Superheroes. And there's obviously some overlap, some audience overlap, but it's a lot of it is very different audiences. Mm-hmm. You've got more gamer old school people, and then people who want to play Marvel Comics characters or just play comics that they knew. They tended to go for Marvel superheroes. Plus, Marvel Supers had the backing of TSR. And so you get TSR fanboys and a much larger distribution network. So you get those people on one side and you get the DIY of Champions, which was a real barrier to entry for a lot of people. Eventually, DC Heroes would arrive. It would have a point-by system that was more close to Champions, but again, DC Heroes, so closer to Marvel. That left us with Superworld, Heroes Unlimited, and GURPS Supers. I think we've mentioned those before as also Rans.
Right, also Rans.
Yeah. What I think is notable for each of those is Those are games that groups adopted because they were already invested in the core system. If they were
Right.
playing basic role playing, if they were playing Riffs Universal, or if they're playing GURPS, they went with those. To kind of talk about what happened after this, we're just going to be covering through third edition, but just to know what the edition history is. 1989, they released Champions fourth edition. This is overseen by Rob Bell. This is the hardcover Big Blue Book.
Big
Some
Blue
people refer
Book.
to it as.
Yeah.
Has a gorgeous George
Oh,
Perez
it
cover,
does.
and it's a defining version for years to come. They would also release a separate Hero System rulebook, which kind of was inside of the Champions rulebook, but they released that separately as well. There would be a later edition of those that would have some corrections, and notably was probably the first time that we had a RPG released with software as a component to it. They had Hero Maker software, which came on a 3.5 disc. It was a software just for making up characters and champions. That's a really important development that we'll probably come back to when we talk about fourth edition in the future. After that, in 1997, Hero Games and R. Talsorian joined forces to create a new hybrid version using Fusion called Champions New Millennium. This is interesting because it's one of the first games that there was a lot of online board discussion and planning and back and forth. And then Champions New Millennium came out, and it did not do well.
Yeah.
They one main book,
Yep.
a couple of supplements, and I don't like it. But 5 years later, in 2002, there's a fifth edition of Hero System, which was released, and now this is the Big Black Book, which I believe is the one that they attempted to show could stop a bullet and actually shot a copy for demonstration purposes. It's notable in that they've got a Hero System book front and center, but not a Champions book. They don't have the Supers book. With that, it's kind of off to the side. Another 10 years later, we get what is now, at time of recording, the most recent version, which is 6th edition. That's in 2012. And that does come with a Champions Complete Core book that has the base rules and the Supers rules together. And that's the one that's out there, that there have been a number of bundle of holdings and things like that have had it. And there's a lot of material out for that. I'll also mention something we may come back to, Ron Edwards' project, Champions Now, which was done as a Kickstarter, which is a reimagining of earlier Champions. And that came out in 2020.
Right.
So that's where Champions is as of this moment.
In comics history, so again, as with Superhero 2044 and Villains and Vigilantes, Champions comes out of 1970s comics, but especially kind of a new approach with late Avengers, Justice League, and especially X-Men. Keep in mind that as we go into the 1980s, we're just starting to get to the advent of the direct market and more indie superhero comics. You can see some of the comic book influences on Champions in the costume designs. A lot of the characters look like X-Men, very thinly drawn. There's an attempt to stay very neutral, maybe even more neutral than Superhero 2044 or Villains and Vigilantes. But that kind of fits with the approach and aesthetic where Champions wants you to build things from the ground up. You can probably trace a few of the influences. I suspect that Wolverine and some of the more realistic-ish comics probably led to the fact that we have killing attacks versus normal attacks in Champions. And of course, the power selection that is presented is certainly influenced by the comics of the day. In general, using Champions, you could probably stat up all of the new X-Men at that time. But it's also notable in atmosphere that Champions comes out before the large wave of comic book self-critique from things like Miracle Man, Watchmen, Kingdom Come, or The Dark Knight Returns. All the presentations of heroes and villains in core book art, jokey comics from the supplements, and characters in the enemies books are very four-color. They have some flaws, partially to justify the disadvantages they use to pay for powers. But they have a Marvel 1960s, 1970s flavor. It is also before the Iron Age approach of the late 1980s to 1990s with ultra-violent heroes and cutthroat vigilantes. The heroes are heroes, even when they're a little over the top. We wouldn't see an embrace of this Iron Age roid, pouch, and justice with a capital J vibe until Dark Champions for Champions 4th edition in 1993. And we said it at the top of the show, Champions 1 through 3, and certainly 4th edition, very nostalgic. They still hold a very dear spot for me in superhero games. probably some of the best superhero gaming I've had.
When I went back to reread that first edition of Champions, how is it so strong right out of the gate? How is it
Hmm.
so good? Because we've seen these games from that time that are a real mess in organization and order and rules coherence and a lot of hand wavy kind of things that are going on. And it's none of that. It's clean, it's clear. It's just wild to me.
What I don't know and what I'm curious about is where is GURPS in its life cycle at the time Champions comes out?
So at this point, the fantasy trip is out and has been out for a couple of years, which kind of is proto GURPS
Okay,
in the sense that we've got characters that are built with skills and they can buy
right.
some advantages and things like that. But it's not until a couple of years after this comes out that Steve Jackson, I think 83, I want to say, releases Man to Man, which is kind of
Right.
the skirmish rules from GURPS. And then I want to say 84 for GURPS, because I
Right.
know definitely that we were playing Champions for several years before GURPS came out.
No, I think you're right. So it's not that. My thought was maybe GURPS is out and they're looking at that. But no, so this is lightning in a bottle they put
Yeah.
together.
Closest I can think of is Traveler. That's the only other game I can think of that is as clean in their first edition.
No, I agree. Traveler was clean. It was good. Another game we got a lot of use out of. Um, like I said, I was fifth grade, sixth grade, and we were playing Champions. And we were big comic book readers. I think the appeal for us was nothing was branded. You could do whatever. There were probably hybrid characters at the beginning because we played fifth grade, sixth grade, seventh grade, eighth grade. I think over time we start to become more creative in how we make characters and villains and things like that.
So did you have like a mythology that went on over the time, or was it very scattershot? Did you build a comic universe of some sort?
It was very scattershot. We pulled in everything that we were inspired by at the time and made it fit. We didn't have a mythology. When we come back to fourth edition, I'm in the military at that point, and I got some great fourth edition games. But in that set, we're playing the same set of folks, and we are building a mythology at that time. Way more structured, but I'm also way older at that time.
Mm-hmm.
But here, no, it's all scattershot. Whatever we're reading, whatever. Like, I remember Secret Wars was out at the time in the comic books, right?
Yeah.
And we decided with our universe, we're going to have a Secret Wars. And that's what we did. And we're playing as Secret Wars is rolling out because we're reading it at the same time and we're pulling in stuff that we like.
Did you use, like in terms of the enemy books and supplements, did you use those pretty much?
Yeah, oh my goodness. Oh, because those are so awesome. And still, as I go back and look at some of those, they are very evocative. From Foxbat down to McCannon, Ogre. Is it Ogre? I think it's Ogre.
Yeah, that's absolutely.
I wonder if they are inspired by Marvel characters. But if they are, they're inspired by a couple. They're hybrids. They're not a one-to-one kind of thing. But we used a lot of them. Like throwing down against McCannon was we never beat that robot, right? But it was always fun trying to do that. That and like I said, player versus player danger room fights.
It was really something. In going back through those enemies books, especially enemies 1 and 2, I am certain that I used or fought against every single one of those characters.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I didn't go through the monster manual and fight every monster. So
and I think as the GM, it is far easier to grab those enemies, and if they're not in groups already, put them together in groups, work them into player disadvantages, and run a scenario. Just do it. Yeah, it was just easy to use rather than always build yours. It was fun building. It's that lonely fun stuff. It's fun to build enemies, but I remember using a lot of them and always grabbing the newest, latest, greatest supplement.
Yeah.
And pulling that in. Yeah, man, you fired off all my neurons when you mentioned turtle armor, right? And I'm like,
yeah.
I can't believe I forgot about that, right?
I will say this, I don't want to dwell on this point, but in going back through the first few editions, it is also clear that it is the whitest game. Just about every character, there are very few POC presenting
Right.
or black presenting characters, villains or otherwise, or side characters. That changes later on, but and I don't know. I mean, of course, it's all in black and white, so maybe they are trying to cope in some way, but I don't know.
What's funny to me is I never noticed any of that until fourth edition. Because Obsidian is in fourth edition, and in one of the games, somebody asked, and I'm like, I don't know. And then as I think about earlier games, well, so, and again, like I said, I think my group was unique, fifth through eighth grade, in that half the group were girls, and then there was a lot of diversity. Norman was Filipino, Elizabeth was Greece. Her folks were immigrants from Greece. I don't know if she came over as a baby or if she was born here, but everyone in the group had some ethnicity to them,
Mm-hmm.
and we just played with what we had all together. And I think we may have overlooked or didn't see how white 1 through 3 was. We just didn't see it. I didn't see it until later on as an adult playing fourth edition.
Got a list of things we can throw back on and forth on this, but knockback.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
This is the thing Jay and I are looking off fondly in the distance, because this was a thing that nowadays it seems like really you're going to calculate that out, but that was an important part of it.
Right.
When you did an attack, your characters did two kinds of damage. You did stun and body, and took the amount of body that was done, and you rolled a couple of dice to subtract from it. I can't remember the exact numbers. And if there was a positive value, then your character got knocked back that many hexes. And it became a thing that you could do attacks aiming for knockback, or
Right.
it was so cool at the time.
It was. Because you then are tactically, depending on the environment, I can knock you back into a car, and depending on that result, right, you're either taking damage from hitting the car or you're getting knocked through the car. And sometimes it's tactical because I need to get you away from me because you've got an area effect thing happening,
Mm-hmm.
and I need some space, I need some distance. So as I think about it, maybe it was clunky at the beginning because it's a new game, like new games are clunky. But I think over time we learn it, and it becomes second nature. And you're right, it was a lot of fun planning for it and getting your knockback in.
The other mechanic, presence attacks. This is another one that is so revolutionary at the time. And also, I didn't see a lot of games use this. Basically, the fact that you could build a character that was scary, and it couldn't stop a bad guy, or, it wasn't an effective full weapon, but you could get people to hesitate. You could cost them half actions, and that mattered. And
again, being a big comics head at the time, I'm thinking of characters like Captain America with a big presence. A lot of times he could get, like you said, hesitation or somebody to stand down, or Spidey with his wisecracks and things like that, throwing you off. I think there were mechanics for losing dice or effectiveness depending on the presence attack. So no, it was good, powerful stuff. So I think this whole game gets into system mastery, right? I think you figure out what your play style is, and you start using these bits and pieces and things to maximize your build. And I think that's system mastery or game mastery. You're learning that, and that could put you over other players who don't have that system mastery.
Yeah. So I ran Champions up through probably 2001, probably 2002. Like I ran continuously, and I really love it. And my wife Sherry does not. She in fact kind of hates it. And part of her thing is, oh, you got to spend these points to do a flashlight. And I'm no, you just by change environment, But her thing isn't about the crunch, isn't about the speed of combat. Instead, because she came in and played in a gaming group with a couple of different groups that had a lot of people who knew champions, you would get in a situation where it's supposed to be balanced, but she has not built optimally. She has not min-maxed her character. It's not that she hasn't built optimally, it's that she hasn't built them to crunch every little point and know exactly how these powers operate and get the biggest structure. And she would play these games of champions and hero system games, and she would feel useless. She would feel ineffective. Other players got to do things. They could do cool things. They could make special attacks. They knew how to do stuff, and she just felt lost.
Gotcha. Yeah.
And this is for a person who could appreciate the mathy side. Sherry works with data scientists, databases, but she did not like it. And that sour taste, like I don't think I could ever get her to play Champions again.
That is awesome. That's funny. Yeah, no, I think, and I didn't realize it. 5th grade through 8th grade, I was in Nerd Farm. Being in that place with those kids at that time was awesome. I had some great memories, but there's also some strife from having to travel from my neighborhood to a different place for school. So I'll always call it Nerd Farm because they kind of separate all those kids away from the main population of kids. But Champions came natural, right? Everybody was in. So much so that I think because the formulas are algebra, you can flip that algebra and make them player-facing roles by moving the math differently. And we would do that to speed up combat. So yeah, we took to it like ducks to water, and then I think system mastery comes from that. And I think we got a lot of that from those danger room exercises where I've got my character, you got your character, there's some objective or whatever, and it's PvP. And I think that makes the GM also, at the time, have to step up their game to bring the enemies right. All points being equal.
Here's the thing. Champions was, for me, the illustration that I am very bad at war games and board games and tactical stuff. Like I learned my limits there because it's one player, the GM, playing against 4, 5, 6 people who can coordinate and plan right. and are collectively smarter than I will ever be. And the only thing I can do is spend more points on my bad guys. You know.
Man, again, I was inspired by comics. I would split the group. And for me, so it's my hate for Superman. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I am disconnected from Superman mythology for a whole bunch of different things. But game-wise and comic book-wise, I want someone to bring their Superman kind of character guy. Because I will have that villain to match. And he's never coming for you. He's coming for your friends, right? Always. I'm going to split the group up, and I'm bringing that guy, right? That's like Trigon beating on Batman, right?
Yeah.
And I would do that. And killing attacks. I would break out killing attacks. Those are nasty, nasty, nasty things in Champions 1 through 3. And I, as a GM, I'd love to use them. So, yeah, you're getting into GM tactics, splitting up the group, using some of these other advantages and things like that. But again, I think it's still all down to system mastery. And that probably is wargaming. I thought we were, and I don't know if you're saving it for last, Wings of the Valkyrie. I thought we were going to touch on that, talk about that. We can skip that if you want to skip that.
No, let's talk about that, and then we could talk about some system things. So, Wings of the Valkyrie it's a module that Hero Games had to recall. It's a time travel adventure where your characters have to stop a group from killing off Hitler's inner circle and preventing the Holocaust. So I'll say that again. You have to stop a group that is trying to stop the Holocaust. You do that because in the adventure, you've seen the modern day world that comes from that, and it's significantly worse because Hitler didn't rise to power and the Holocaust didn't happen. It is a weird module. It is wildly tone deaf.
Right.
Despite having a section that talks about what happens when the players start arguing about the morality of this. And it's wild. It stuck with me because my sister, Kat Rambo, she ran a couple of sessions of this for us. And partway through session 3, she suddenly realized what was going on. She started to put all the stuff together and realized, oh, shit. And she shut the scenario down, and she had a Deus Ex Machina figure come in and reset everything. And we never saw that module again. And it was like a few months later that I heard that it had gotten recalled and pulped.
Recalled, yeah. I didn't hear about it till the time it was getting recalled and pulped, so I never got my hands on it. and end up having to read everything after the fact. I wonder, and again, I don't know what the timeline is. We've got stuff like the X-Men, Days of Futures Past, and things like that where there's time travel, Age of Apocalypse.
Age of Apocalypse would come later, but Days of Future Past definitely would have been before this because that's very early 80s. So Wings of the Valkyrie, I think here, let me check this copy my sister gave me. 1987.
So I wonder if Days of Future Past inspired that and they just picked the wrong details.
Yeah. It's so weird because there are a couple other directions you could go with that. Again,
right.
Like doing the Days of Future Past, somebody comes back from the future and they're going to do this. And the thing that partially bothers me is in reading the module, like it's a very dense, heavily written module where somebody clearly went and did a lot of research on the period. And it's all in there. And you did all this research. You know the period.
Right.
You've got all this. How can you not see?
Right.
And it's actually written by Rob Bell, who would author Champion's 4th edition.
Right.
So
I don't know, right? That's a conversation, right? I'd love to sit down and say, what were you thinking about? Let's start at the top.
And we later on we would see some things. White Wolf got in trouble for bringing the Shoah into Wraith, I think, and but weird. And it's such an odd step for Champions for me because so many of their modules are like, here's a group that's a heavy metal band that you have to track down and fight. Here are these 4 horsemen of the apocalypse.
Right.
And, these guys are elemental bad guys. You know, that's the modules that we see. This is so different.
Right. No, I'm with you. Groups like Zodiac and Clown, right?
And there are some great things. Red Doom, which was their Soviet source book.
Yeah, that was
Everybody loved that. It was so well written. There was Neutral Ground, which was like an idea of a place where villains and heroes could get together. Like those were great. And Aaron Elston's
Strike Force. Yes. That was awesome. Yeah.
That one in particular, we had never seen a book that said, this is my campaign. This is the campaign I ran. Here's how I ran it. Here is my house rules. Here's what I changed. Here are my main characters. Here was the big plot. And I don't think we've seen that really since of somebody coming in and saying, this is my version of the world. This is how I ran it. And maybe if you want to do it, you can. The only thing I can think of is Monty Cook doing his version of World of Darkness for a supplement. But other than that.
Right. No, and you're right. When Strike Force came out, I felt like I kind of got permission to break rules, to do different things that the table was into. Yeah, because you could see to know that Aaron Alston had house rules, that he didn't run Champion straight. That meant, well, I don't have to run it straight. We could do some different things that we like. It's okay. No, that was a good book. That was very influential to how I ran Champions and then other games later on.
So disadvantages are a great hook. It's a great idea. It's a great way to differentiate your characters. You get some extra points and you take a limitation. These are flaws. They're things that reveal personalities. They offer story hooks. The problem is that the way Champions has them is that a lot of them are at the start of session, you roll things.
Right.
And everyone rolls them. You're playing rules as written. Everyone rolls them at the beginning of a session. And these include things like I'm being hunted, or I'm hunting somebody, or I have a tip-ended NPC, or I have a secret identity that might cause a problem. And each disad has a chance of happening, 8 or less on 3d6 being the rarest, and 14 or less being most common. So if everybody's rolling these, you have a table of 5 players, everybody's rolling these. If you do that, and everyone's got a couple of them, you're going to have a bunch of these at the start of a session pop up that either you deal with them and suddenly you're having to run around on that, or you're hand waving them away. And then why do we have disadvantages? So how is that at your table?
I think at the beginning, we did it rules as written, right? And I think there were at least 4 players and 1 GM. Dallas and I would tag team being the GM off and on. We'd switch. But the deal is, I think early enough we figured out there's too many of these things popping off at the top of the session. We both took to, I don't know that we had officially decided how we're going to handle stuff, but what I think happened is we kind of write down all the things that fired off and we try to work them in the session. And if it didn't work in the session, it didn't work out in the session. And then I remember between games, there was a hunted that didn't happen. I wasn't able to get it in. But then I thought, comic book wise, soap opera wise, that hunted did happen. Maybe we just didn't see it, right? Maybe the reader got a panel where the hunter is there taking notes and watching, and maybe I can link that into the next game, depending on what gets rolled and what comes up.
Yeah.
And so that started for me. I didn't drop it on the floor, but I made a note that it happened and I didn't get to it. Maybe I can use it next session. Maybe that whatever it was there, and I will just compound it. You owe me interest in the next session. And that's what I would do. I'm not sure what Dallas did, but for sure I know between 4 people, if everyone's rolling terribly, we didn't use everything that came up.
I wish I had had the concept of clocks.
Yes.
Then
yes.
That would have been the best. I think if I had that, you could have had ticks on those and they would build up. You could create some tension on it. Maybe have the players have to spend effort to take them down if they started to get threatening.
Right. No, you're right. That gives you a better way of managing all of those. And then you can pull the trigger on them when the clock goes off or when it makes sense.
The bottom line, they're great for ways of bringing out more about the character that we wouldn't otherwise necessarily have gotten.
Right. Variable power pools. Oh, my God.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
So for those of you at home, why is this a point of comp? As we mentioned, there are various power frameworks you can have. You could have a multi-power, which is basically a framework that allows you to have a set of powers for cheaper because you can only use one at a time. So that's fine. You have elemental control, which is slightly different. Basically, you have a themed set of powers. You've got some points to spread around them. It's not as cheap as a multi-power, but allows you to pool them together. Variable power pool gives you a set of points, and then on the fly, you spend those points to create powers. Often there are limitations, like I can only do powers that relate to ice or body control and things like that, but often they're more open. So talk about what the problem is with that, Jay.
So I think players, my experience is players see VPP, variable power pool, and they think, oh, I can delay my choice in powers. I'll put a bunch of points in here, and then I can have whatever I want later. If I read Champions correctly, these frameworks are discounts on powers when you get creative about how your powers are themed. So if, like Iceman from the X-Men, he's probably an elemental control, ice powers. But you could build him with a variable power pool. What happened is I'm running a game and 2 players decide they have a theme for their character and they're going to make them variable power points because they're too lazy. They just figured I can delay and defer what kind of powers. And I'm like, no, that's not how that works. I'm going to need you to figure out what your concept is, what the theme is, because the VPP demands that. So this becomes a battle of VPPs. And so I pick Sandman of Spider-Man fame, because he could be elemental control, right? He could just be sand. Or you could build him as a VPP, which is what I did. And what a VPP lets you do, if you're bringing your A game in system mastery, I had 3 modes the Sandman, my Sandman, could be in. And that lets you have 3 sets of powers. There's conditions of how you change those modes. But essentially, he could have a bruiser mode. He's got a stealth mode, right? And I theme his powers accordingly based around sand, because that's what he's made of. And these other folks did not have the system mastery, and right? And they'd have been better off with a multi-power or maybe an elemental control and had more dice to work with. They didn't know how to use the VPP. I think that requires some system mastery and some creativity, right? So you could tie them all together. And I think that's the fight always, is that the thought is, well, I can have all these powers at any time I want. And I think they're building the Beyonder of Secret Wars fame is what they have in their head, but it doesn't work that way. And I think they have a poor understanding what the VPP really is about.
And it flattens out if you can all have powers that can do anything.
Right.
And everybody has those, and even if they have a theme, why are we doing the rest of it? There's a flattening that happens there. I'll admit a couple of times I did VPPs, and after I played those as a player, I banned them when I was running.
Yeah, generally I won't use them, but if a player decides they want to do it, I'm listening. What do you got? What do you think you're going to do? And not in a challenging way. I want to hear the right answer. And when I hear something silly, I'm like, why don't we try it this way? You don't really need the VPP to do that. And when I get pushback, then I'm like, okay, so now I will build a villain using the VPP so I can show you. And we do that. And
what Trad GM comes out here. I love it. So,
and I work him into the story, right? It's not out of nowhere, right? I work it into this, and then I proceed to clean house with the one villain. Yes. My favorite thing to do in Champions, and again, this is system mastery. When Rich and I played, this is what I did: is he built a speedster, and the first couple of sessions, we're getting into his life, what's his day-to-day kind of stuff is, and I forget what his first big fight is, but I think they're agents. And then we move into maybe two villains that are half. If he's 200 points, they're 100 points apiece. I give him a hard time with those two 100-point characters because he's a new player and I'm skilled, but he's learning how to make things work, and I don't have to work super hard because these two characters are kind of coordinating together. That's one of my favorite things to do, is to build lower point characters and have them coordinate. And then the next step is to build what I hope to be the character's archenemy, and same amount of points, but a different, I think in his case, I'm trying to remember who I think that person had teleportation powers, where he had speedster powers.
Mm-hmm.
And again, they're the same amount of points, same amount of disadvantages, and they just go head up. But I will use all the soap opera drama stuff rather than the power stuff and see what we get. I don't know where we're going, but yeah, to see what we get. Those are some of the favorite things I like with Champions. I think we play Champions now, but still, It's built off of Champions 1 and 2.
Anything else you want to say about Champions?
I can't wait till we get to the Big Blue Book, maybe some Champions now. I love this game. Like I said, it's probably the measuring stick for me. I think anymore, though, when I sit down to play, I'd like to play with folks who are super excited enthusiasts or veterans, right? Mm-hmm. I don't know that it's a game that I would sit down with beginners and teach. There are other supers games that are easier to get them in. But I think once you're past the character building part, it's a trad game like any other trad game. I don't think it's crazy.
I agree with you. If I were going to put sessions of Champions on Open Hearth, I would definitely do pre-gens.
Right.
Use Owlbear Rodeo or whatever to do hexes. Keep characters simple, but it'd still be a lot of work. Well, we'll definitely come back to talk about Champions 4. And I don't know if we're going to talk about 5 or 6. Pretty much 4 is where...
I'm with you.
But we will at some point talk about Champions now because you've had some experience with that. Listeners, that is our show. Thank you for joining us. This is a production of the Open Hearth Gaming Community. You can find out more about that at openhearthgaming.com. This show is a series that's part of the Around the Hearth podcast feed. Hey, if you like this, please share it, rate, review, whatever, and you can get feedback to us. There's a contact in the show notes. Jay, thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. This was great. I'm enjoying it.
Awesome. And that's our show.